Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this YT live session with Elisa. Elisa, welcome to the session. Um, Elisa is a current HBS student, class of 2023. She's a former e-GMATer, and she's been graceful enough to accept our invite to come and talk about her journey to Harvard Business School. So, welcome once again, Elisa, and I want to thank you first of all for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So just in terms of the format for this interview, for those of you who are here, and I also want to thank you guys for joining because for some of you it's right after your work, for some of you it probably is during your work or so. So just the format of this interview, the way it would go about is, we'll have about 40 minutes of standard interview questions. These are some of the questions that you guys have submitted. Some of these have been curated by the e-GMAT team. And then after those 40 minutes, you will have we'll take questions that you post in the chat overall. Now, if you post something about something that's about what we're talking about, then we'll take it right then and there. But typically, we take those questions after those 40 minutes. And Elisa has a hard stop at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 7:30 a.m. Phoenix time, or I think. Um, that translates to what 8 p.m. Indian Standard Time or so, because she has a test, and so I want to again thank her because she's going to go and take a test right away. So, Lisa, let's start with your background. Tell us a bit about who you are or who you were prior to joining HBS, just your work experience and your educational background also.
Yeah, so I'm Singaporean, born and raised in Singapore. Went to
Mm,
local school, and then after high school, I came here for college. I went to Cornell, had my bachelor's in food science because I really didn't know what I study after high
mm,
school. But then I saw that Cornell has a very
mm,
interesting program and an interesting major called food science, and decided to
mm,
give it a try. I knew I really loved food, so I decided to learn more about it.
mm,
I think in school I participated in a lot of product development competitions. I think I was very excited in hands-on experimentation and benchtop formulation, um,
okay.
and figuring out how to transform consumer trends into a viable product. After after college, I decided to work at a CPG. It's
Mm,
called Celestial Group in New York City.
mm,
Um, and I was mainly doing quality assurance, trying to implement policies, standardized policies and procedures across our manufacturing facilities, and overseeing our contract manufacturers to ensure that what they produce for us are up to standard.
mm.
So that's mainly my background.
Okay, so you're not you're not an investment banker. You've not done VC. It's a traditional CPG job, and with quality assurance. But you had a lot of responsibilities doing this. How many products were you managing while you were doing this? Just to set some context, and just the volume of in terms of dollar volume of products that were under your responsibility that you were responsible for. That's,
Yeah, I think when I first started off at the company, I was responsible for writing, standard operating procedures, quality and safety procedures for about nine of our manufacturing facilities.
mm,
I think the thing is that Hain Celestial, as they grew over the
mm,
years, they grew by acquisition, but they failed to really integrate all these different brands into one big whole company. And so when I came on board, I was in charge of, standardizing quality and safety in these facilities.
mm,
And then I transitioned into a more of an external role where, I managed about, seven brands under me,
mm,
food brands. And I also managed about my relationship with 10 contract manufacturers who are manufacturing products for these seven brands.
mhm,
So it's a lot of communication management, relationship management, working throughout the supply chain to make sure that what they produce for us are up to standard and up to quality. I think throughout my time at Hain, I was also, gave some, lunch and learn series presentations. I managed to co-chair the Asian ESG group.
mm,
So I think those responsibilities made me stand out, even though I had very
mm.
short work experience as well.
Okay. Would you did you work on or were you responsible for any of the brands that we may be aware of? You know? Just
Yeah.
sidebar.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mainly oversaw pantry brands. So those
Country
are
brands. Okay.
beans, our soups,
Mm,
some baby products,
mm.
not the big ones.
Not the big ones. Got it. Okay. So
More for senior people.
okay, so now we have a reasonably good background with regards to what you did. Let's kind of talk about, from that background to that journey towards MBA. So before we start about this, so as you thought about an MBA, I mean, what was the driving force? I mean, why did when did the thought of doing an MBA first come to you?
Honestly, pretty pretty late. I would say pretty late. I think I initially wanted to do a master's in food science. Coming out of college, I knew that I was going to do a graduate degree.
Mm,
Um, I think, partly because where I come from, I think you're expected to do a higher education.
mm.
I had initially expected to do a master's in food science because, I was like, I don't know business. I'd rather study about food. I don't
You
know.
love food.
I said I love food. um, you know. But then I think after working in industry, and I knew that I always wanted to work in industry. I didn't want to
Mm,
be a researcher or, in
mm,
academia. Um, After working in industry, I realized that a lot of things I learned on the job itself. I was quick to pick it up.
mm,
People will mentor you and things like that. You actually don't really need a master's in food science to succeed in working in the
mm,
CPG industry. Um, and at least for the roles that I was looking at, typical R&D quality assurance role in CPG, traditional
mm,
CPG companies. And then I think what I realized was that I lack a lot of business acumen. When I was
mm,
communicating with cross-functional people like
mm,
people in the supply chain, people in finance and marketing, I was taking their words at face value
mm,
versus trying to figure out what it really meant for the underlying business. And that's how I really realized that, maybe a master's in business
mm.
makes the most sense rather than a master's in food science.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I think why I decided to apply when I applied was two things. I think definitely accelerated by my COVID. I think
Mm,
I was seeing a lot of changes during COVID. I think food insecurity, food challenges, shortages, all those things were exacerbated. And so I kept on asking myself, maybe it's now the best time to make a change. If I want to do something about food insecurity and food sustainability, which are where my passion is,
mm,
why should I wait any longer? I think I kept asking myself that question. So I knew I wanted to apply for this round also because it was the next step where I had to think if I want to extend my work
mm,
visa or if I wanted to go back to Singapore or
mm.
I want to go back to school. So that was a few factors that really pushed me to applying for this round. And then I think when I realized that the timeline on
Mm,
if I wanted to apply for class of 2023
mm.
was as such, I started panicking because I think I only
Wow.
in January 2020, and
Mm.
I had my GRE scores, but
Yeah, I was going to ask it.
it was not great. So I was like, okay, I need to start studying for my GMAT.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so that's when I actually started.
Oh, cool. Cool. Okay, that's good. So essentially, from a job perspective, you were saying, okay, I understand the food science field, but there's these business questions that I'm kind of taking people on what they're telling me. I'm not questioning. I don't have the tools to question
Yeah,
what people are telling me, so I need to figure that out. And
yes,
the pandemic happened. You realize it was a disruption, and then you kind of saw, hey, there's more to food, and so I think if I understand the business side with me, it'll help. Okay,
yes.
that's a good enough reason to do that. So let's kind of you left at it. This was a question is very interesting. Were you a good student at Cornell? I mean, did you have a good GPA?
I think I was a good student. I had a good GPA. So that helped.
What was it?
I got a 3.76.
3.76. That's pretty good. Yes.
So I
So
think
that's
yeah,
kind of
definitely
yeah, it's
helped.
pretty good. Yeah. So magna cum laude,
Yes.
right? Now
Yes.
you're a magna cum laude. Okay. Um, So then let's kind of go from there to the GMAT. So, GMAT carries, significant weight on the
Yeah.
HBS application, and people said about 22% is 16% is the total score, about 6% is quant. So when you started preparing for the GMAT, what are the key challenges that you face, and how did we as e-GMAT help you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I think when I started preparing the GMAT, I bought one of the books. I can't exactly remember what it is, and I started just, doing it from front to back,
Mm,
Um, definitely a key challenge was forgetting all my, mental math or math shortcuts and
mm,
having to relearn them again.
mm,
So that was definitely a challenge. I think also, I think by me just doing, but from the book from front to back, there was not much structure, and I actually didn't realize that when I was doing it. So when I went to the exam itself, it was, I didn't really have structured thinking. All my concepts were, here and there.
mm.
Of course, did not get a great first score, so that's how I decided to, come to e-GMAT, because what I read
What did
online,
you struggle with the most, if I may ask? Which part in quant? Do you remember?
I don't
Or
remember.
verbal?
It might have
Okay.
been the second part of quant, where they give you, if option one is good enough, option two
Data
is,
sufficiency.
yeah, probably. I think that one I struggled with the most.
Mm,
And I think for the verbal, it wasn't as difficult, but I think, for grammar, it's very strict, which is, different from your day-to-day speaking. So I think
yes.
having to relearn that, of
Mm,
course the SATs tested the same thing, but having to relearn that, um took some time, I
mm.
think. um and then of course, the stamina and trying to sit up for exam for 3 hours, that
3 hours.
itself was,
Yes.
exactly, so I had to train myself for that. So decided to, maybe find some more structured learning.
Mm,
Um, and then I started doing some reviews, and then I think
mm,
I came across e-GMAT and was able to do a um consultation initially.
mm,
And I think that consultation, where one of your colleagues was able to break down, the journey, the
mm.
timeline, what I had to study, was very helpful, and it made me more confident in e-GMAT and helping me succeed in my GMAT journey.
Yeah, and structure is a very big part of what we offer, where it just translates that entire GMAT journey to whatever score you're aiming for, in a certainty, a path, that as we call it, or some people call it a study planner. So prior to this, or let me ask this: how does that structure help you? I mean, can you translate structure into what feeling do you have when you say, okay, I have a structure for my prep?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends person to person, right? I think I'm a person that really likes structure and
Mm, mm,
do well with practice. Some people are
mm,
able to just take in information and apply them quickly. I think for me, I need practice.
mm,
So at e-GMAT, I think it's, you guys make sure that we are able to
mm,
do well in one concept first before moving on, and then adding
mm,
it together, and then moving on again, and then adding them up
mm.
together and moving on again. So I think that was helpful in making sure that, when I move down the chain, I don't forget the first part. um, I think that's the way of structured learning. Putting things into topics and things like that will definitely help me.
Okay, so let's kind of talk about the HBS application now. And I think one of the first things when you think about Harvard or Harvard Business School is, it wants to get people, or bring in people who are mission oriented, and kind of have a drive. Um, how did you kind of portray this through your application?
Mission oriented and had a drive. I think, yeah. To be honest, I think I really, it definitely takes a lot of self reflection on, how actually you are, who you are, and what you've done. I think it takes a lot of reflecting and digging deep
Mm,
to your past achievements and also your achievements now to,
mm,
think, okay, what sets me apart? Why will HBS choose me? And I think,
mm,
like, through that process of reflection, I figured out, I realized that, hey, actually, I've done quite a bit. I think I have a very unique story. I was able to share that in my essay. I
Mm.
was able to talk to my recommenders and help them have them highlight my maturity, my leadership skills, especially coming from from a younger age. I
Mm.
was I had them, highlight some of the leadership skills and maturity I
But,
have.
but so Elisa, so let's kind of go back, but let's kind
Yeah.
of go to the mission-oriented part. So when you say, and then you're an admit, and HBS has
Yeah.
admitted you. So what kind of a mission, or rather, what when you in your candidacy, what did it reflect in your interviews? Where were you going for with regards to, or how would an MBA help you become a better or more
Oh,
successful individual?
gotcha. Okay.
Mm.
Um, I think, of course, I think how MBA would help me become a more successful person. I think,
Mm.
round out my technical skills, build business acumen. I think what sets HBS apart is our case method and having that, classroom participation where you hear from different feedback versus like
Mm.
a lecture tutorial style. Being in a case method, you really hear from lot of different perspectives. People
Mm.
in my class are so much more experienced than I am, and
Mm.
being able to learn from them really like challenges your thoughts and help you think outside of the box. So I
Mm.
think in that sense, HBS, it's a steep learning curve, but I think
Mm.
it pushes you to become, who you can be without even imagining who that you can be, who that future self is. Um, I think HBS really just puts you in an environment where you can grow.
You can grow. Okay. All right. Now, the fact that you're a younger applicant, one of the big challenges that younger applicants have is the ability to show leadership because you've not
Yeah.
had that many years of experience. So, so first of all, how did you show leadership in your application, and then how did you come up with those leadership experiences to really say, hey, these are the 3 or 4 areas where I've portrayed leadership so far in the 3 years or 2.5 years of work that I've had, and this is the one, or these are the couple that I kind of choose to highlight.
Yeah, I think leadership, yeah, like I mentioned again, I definitely
Let's kind of start with what do you define as leadership? I think that's a very
yeah,
important fundamental thing.
yeah, I think most commonly leadership is taught as, okay, I lead a team, for example, right? But I think other leadership aspects can be like, influencing people or initiating ideas. You don't have to lead a team, but you can start the ball rolling. You
When
can.
when you say lead a team, you need not have formal reporting responsibilities. That
Yeah,
is.
I don't think so. I think in a traditional sense, it may mean that, but in reality, I don't think you need to have formal,
Mm.
people below you to, manage.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so like I mentioned before, I really had my recommenders highlight those parts in my recommendation letter. Did not know what they wrote, but I called them and I said, hey, I am a younger applicant. Could you maybe, vouch for my leadership skills and my
Mm.
maturity as a person? um so whatever they wrote, it must have worked. But I think also in my resume,
Mm.
I think I also focused on my past academics in Cornell, where I
Mm.
led product development teams. So I think that's more of a traditional leadership role. But also outside of, in the community, what leadership roles did I take? Did I like volunteer in a soup kitchen, or and what impact did I have? Did I I don't, initiate an idea in my church community, and what impact did that have?
Mm.
I think, the concept of initiating is also like a, related to leadership. And I think I was able to highlight that in my resume throughout.
Okay. Um, so you talked about the soup kitchen. You talked about the what is it at Cornell, the
Product
man
development team.
product development teams. Were there certain initiatives you took at Hain that where that showed your leadership capabilities at work?
No, sorry, I think you cut out a bit.
Yeah. So at work, were there certain things where you took initiative and they led to tangible outcomes?
Yes. So actually, during COVID, I was responsible for managing our supply chain disruptions.
Mm,
So because of COVID, we couldn't really outsource from outside of the US, and we had
mm,
to shift our sourcing internally in the US. And
mm,
so transitioning from, trying to verify new ingredients and validating new ingredients, that was my responsibility.
mm,
And I was mainly communicating with senior leadership team to ensure that these ingredients are verified and validated as quickly as possible so that our production doesn't stop. So I think that that's an example of I didn't really manage anyone, but I think a leadership was really like managing communication with senior people, making sure that the process goes smoothly, in such a challenging time. So being able to you know handle all
mm.
those.
I think one of the other things that come out of that example is any disruption is an opportunity for leadership. I mean, to show initiative, which in turn leads to leadership experiences. So
Yes.
that's I think a really important point to note. So for people who are viewing this, if you see a disruption, a change happening, and you feel you are qualified enough to make that change become successful, then you have an opportunity, take it on. It'll show up, or it'll work well in it, and then it might work well in an MBA essay if you're
Hmm.
successful. So so let's talk about the HBS question. And in general, those questions are very challenging. When I talk to admission consultants, the HBS application is probably one of the most challenging ones for them, even though it's probably the shortest application that's out there. But they charge the most for it because it's the shortest application, and so you have to be very, very careful about what do you write in every aspect, whether it's a resume or because it has just one question. So there's this question that's asked. It says, "Hey, as we review your application, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy for Harvard Business School?" And there's no word limit to this question. Um, Now, so how did you go about? What kind of brainstorming did you do about this question, and then how did you? What did you write, and what qualities of that answer express?
Yeah, so I think going back to what HBS sees in the applicant, firstly is academics, right? And then secondly is communities. Thirdly is leaderships. Something along those lines. I can't remember exactly word for word. So I knew I had academics covered with my GPA,
Mm,
and somewhat okay GMAT scores. And I knew my leadership skills. It was I
mm,
reflected it in my resume, my recommendation letters, the application itself. So I decided to go the community route, and
mm,
started brainstorming that way on how what are the impacts I've had or influences I've had in community, and what situations have I showed community values, and how I really think community is important to me.
mhm.
And so that's where I started, and then everything there links to my passion for food and how I was able to use food to bring people together. So that's how I approached the essay.
Community plus passion for food, and then the outcome was people coming together as
Yes.
such. Okay. How long was this essay?
I believe it was about 1,200.
Oh, so you rarely use the space. You really said you can write as long as any, because it's a typically a longer essay.
It is. Yeah. What I've so I of course I did some research before I wrote it on
Mm,
recommended how long your essay should be. It's about
mm,
they say 800 to 1,400 words.
mm,
I do believe that my essay is probably on the longer side, but I think I made sure that each point that I'm trying to make is significant, adds significant value to the entire essay. It's not like I'm repeating points. So I think on that, and I will justify the length.
and so how long did you? I mean, what was the time between that initial brainstorming to that first draft to final submission? I mean, what was the
Yeah.
dwell time on this?
Yeah, I think I started HBS essay really late. So I applied round two. And I think just because, HBS essay is so open-ended, I
Mm,
decided to tackle the earlier essays on, what are your short-term goals, what are your long-term goals of the other
mhm,
schools first before tackling HBS. I think by tackling these essay questions first, it allows me
mhm,
to think through, my life a little bit, and, what aspects I want to highlight in my HBS essay. So I managed to like write all those first, and then I think I only started at HBS in December.
Got it.
Mine was January 5th, so of course it was a little bit, tough trying to put things together that quickly. But I think by then, by December, I really had strong idea of on what I really wanted to write and what my message that I wanted to bring across. So it wasn't like I was starting from scratch entirely from in December. I
Oh
could
yeah,
really.
you were. Yeah, I think just to add some context, you applied to Stern, MIT, Wharton, LBS,
Yeah,
Columbia, and then HBS. So you'd done all these applications before you did your HBS application. Is that what you're saying?
I put I put HBS and MIT at the end just because
Mm,
they both have very different questions from the other schools.
yes.
So both of which I started, and also MIT had a later deadline, so both of which I started in December.
There's nothing to do with the fact that they're both in Boston, right? A mile away from
No,
each other. But
no,
no, okay.
no.
Makes sense. All right. Okay, so that's good. Uh, I think this is good. I have a lot of stuff over here. Uh, did you engage with an admission consultant for your applications?
I did not.
So how did you kind of prepare to do so many applications? This is a lot of work.
I know that's a good question. Good thing I was able to have my sister really support me. I think my family was a big support. I think my sister really encouraged me and helped me review things, and utilizing friends and family to help me review my essays and resume and etc.
Hmm.
I was on the verge of not applying for HBS and MIT just because you can imagine by the time I write so many essays, I was really burnt out by December.
Hmm.
But my sister was like, hey, why not apply for HBS? They have a biggest class anyways. You might get a shot in that. So decided to give it a go. I think really utilizing your support community and keeping you accountable and encouraging you, it really helps.
Now, did you reach out to any current students at any of these schools and
I
talk
did.
to them?
I did.
Okay. How many?
Yep.
And just tell us a few more details. How did you go about doing it? How many students?
Yeah. So I think for each school, I roughly contacted, about between 1 to 3 students,
Hmm.
current students. And how I went about doing that was, LinkedIn, cold call,
Hmm.
cold message,
Hmm.
and I mainly looked at people who had similar backgrounds that as I had,
Hmm.
maybe come from a food space or a science background, or maybe have also as
Hmm.
work experience I did and how they,
Hmm.
managed to overcome that. And just decided to reach out that way through LinkedIn.
Okay. Okay. That's good. That's good. So essentially, you kind of found someone who's like you on LinkedIn. Now, were most of the people who you reached out to, were they from Singapore, or did that not matter?
Yeah, that didn't matter. That didn't matter too much to me. I did. Well, I was able to find some people from Singapore, but that was not my main concern.
That was not even. It's just the background, the kind of experiences
Yes.
you've had. So food industry, or food and quality, or just quality and maybe an adjacent sector or so. Okay, that makes complete sense. Now, were people responsive on LinkedIn?
I would say majority were responsive. Probably 85%, 90%. Um,
Okay.
I would say they're pretty responsive.
Okay. Now let's talk about. I'm going to talk about two other things. We have about 10 more minutes before we open the questions. Um, so letter of recommendations. How did you prepare your recommenders? You kind of we briefly talked about it, but I think let's kind of formally talk about it. Um, what are the key questions, if you're aware of those questions in the LOR? And then how did you prepare your recommenders? Because it's a lot of work to write a recommendation, especially a good one. So yeah. And who did you choose to begin with? First of all, let's start with the easy one. Who did you choose as
Yeah.
your recommenders?
Yep. I think I was very fortunate in this sense because I had two managers that I had really close direct relationship with.
Hmm.
And on a personal level, we get along. So actually, the first manager, she was, my first ever manager when I started a job, but she left the company. And then, so the second manager came over and oversaw me. And I think I had two people that I had direct relationships with, and both of which I got along really well. So in that sense, I think I was really lucky. It was a no-brainer that I was going to choose both of them. And I think what I did, the first step was really explain to them why I'm applying for MBA, and what I intend to do with it, why I think it'll help me. So making sure that they are on the same page as what I actually express in my application. And then
So this initial meeting, how long was this? I mean,
it was a 30-minute meeting that I blocked off on a calendar and just decided to share my plans moving forward. Good thing that they were both very open to it and receptive to it and supportive. And yeah, I think so. That was the initial conversation. And then I think, I guess I made sure to be very clear on the deadlines, the timelines, and when I wanted things to be done by, and made sure to send them, regular emails on updating them, reminders, etc. And then I think, as I went through the application itself, I realized that, hey, I actually can use the recommendation letter as another tool to highlight who I am as a person. So when I look across my entire application package, I started thinking, okay, what is missing in my application? And then from there, I talked to my recommenders again and said, hey, can you highlight these aspects, that are
so
not.
how many times, if I were to really say, first of all, this engagement with the recommenders, the two recommenders that you have, how, or are we looking at what, a 2-3 month long period? What is it like?
So I think I gave them a heads up in July.
Okay, so that's for you. That's like a 4 to 5 month now, given that a 5 month long period, given that the last round two was December, right?
Yeah. I give them. Yeah, I think I give them a very initial heads up, like, hey, these are I'm planning to apply for MBA. Applications are not open, but just a FYI, so that they know what's coming. So they know what's coming, So yeah.
Okay, that's really now, and that's very good that you kept them updated, and you actually was in constant communication. Now, did you prepare any, what I call as a formal timeline kind of document for them? I mean, or just these are three Ds, just a brief one page, or as why I'm doing an MBA, or was it purely conversational?
Why I'm doing an MBA was purely conversation. With regards to timeline, I just wrote it in an email, in the body of the email. These are the schools I'm applying, these are the deadlines, and when I want, and these are the dates where I want to have them ready by. So nothing fancy, no Gantt chart, no whatever
No
Excel
Gantt
sheet.
chart, nothing. Got it.
Yeah, I think just make it simple. I was able to make it simple because I think all my recommenders also have like tons of things on their plates. So making the process as simple for them as possible, and I think giving them a topic to write about. When I mentioned about how I had them write about my leadership and maturity skills. Also, I think simplified the process, I feel.
Got it. Okay. Let's talk about the HBS interview, the famous HBS interview, which is, it's supposed to be super precise, when it starts, when it ends, right? So, so how did you prepare for it, and how was the experience?
Yeah, I think HBS was the last interview that I had among all the other schools that gave me interviews. So I was able to have some practices, before HBS. How I went about practicing it, I think I really didn't practice that much with another person. I mainly like tried to, mentally try to go through in my head. I was cautious of not over practicing, just because, you don't want to sound robotic or, over rehearsed. So I think by having a few other interviews before the HBS essay, I thought it was,
That helped.
pretty much, I was, versed by then. And then in terms of, preparing for questions, I think because, HBS interview is so open-ended and such an open book. I shared my resume and my essay with a few friends, also including some current students, and and s- and told them, hey, if you did not know me as a person, what would you ask? Based on my essay and based on my resume, what are some questions that you will ask me? And then so I was able to get some really good questions, and based on that, I prepared accordingly.
Okay. Is the HBS interview different from, let's say, a Stern interview or a Columbia interview? And if so, in what ways?
Yes. So Stern interview is a group interview, right? So Stern interview is a group interview. They give you a topic, and then they want to see how you discuss in a group,
It's a group discussion then.
the group discussion.
Got
Uh,
it.
yeah, MIT interview was entirely behavioral interview questions. I think HBS, Stern interview is quite traditional, very, some behavioral questions and some personal questions, and, why MBA, why Stern. I think HBS is really like all of that combined.
Oh,
Behavioral, personal, but also industry questions and your passion questions.
yeah, and that's something that I've heard. They really ask you questions from your field of work.
Yes. Yes.
They want to make sure you've done what you've actually done. You've had the achievement that you've actually portrayed. Um,
Mhm.
so how did you and so what aspect of your preparation helped you answer those questions, or was it just introspection?
Yeah, it was introspection. Again, asking, my friends and family and friends, if you did not know me, what would you ask me? I think having those additional questions that are not traditional interview questions, I was able to prepare then. Um,
Okay,
yeah, having my current students review my essay and resume, and what questions would they have asked me. Also, because the current students that I talked to, came from similar backgrounds, so what questions did I ask them when they were interviewing? So in that sense, I was able to prepare it.
got it. Okay,
Mhm.
so I think that's kind of I know that Elisa, you have a hard stop in another 23 minutes because you've got to go and take an operations, you said OR exam, or
It's technology operations management class.
yeah, okay, okay, technology and operations management. So I want to kind of at this point open us to questions. Let's kind of look at this overall. So talk about scholarship. You don't have a scholarship from HPS, right?
Nope.
But if you're looking for scholarships, we on e-GMAT.com we have an admits and scholarships portal where you can barely see, I think about $10 million worth of scholarship that's listed out there. We're going to add more and more. That's something that you can look up, and you can um, read and watch interviews of people who have scholarships. Did you care about scholarship? Was
I did not. So I have to admit, I'm very fortunate that I didn't have to think about that, but very grateful for my family and being able to
Yes.
support me.
And as such, the MBA has such a high return on investment overall on your life, especially in HBS MBA or so. I think let's talk about this question. And then again, I don't know if we can. I want you to guesstimate it. I know there's no definitive answer to this. So the question says, "What impact did your letter of recommendation have on your application?" It's a percent level answer. Yeah, it's a
Percentage level, I have no idea.
yes.
I definitely think it had some impact, given my young age, limited work experience. I definitely think it had some impact to convince admission and admission
Admissions.
yeah, to
Yeah.
convince admission officers that I was able to be in class with all these other individuals with much more experience and background than I have. So I definitely think it definitely played a huge role in my application.
I agree. So I think so when I think about letter of recommendation in a traditional application, and it's a traditional, I'm talking about non-HBS because HBS doesn't have a lot of essays.
Yeah.
What an LOR does is it confirms the achievements in many ways that you've listed in those essays, and then the second thing it does is it kind of really talks about how someone who directly manages you looks up to you. what do they think as your qualities, and what do they think as the areas where you can improve. On an HBS application, where I think other than the letter of recommendation, they probably just have your resume for your achievements, right? Because there aren't that many essays out there.
Yep.
It actually has even a higher impact. And in your case, with less, a lower than average experience, it actually even had a much bigger role, or so. I'm going to take Sezgi's question, and I think I'm going to just translate this question slightly. It says, his question is, there any chance for an associate degree holder with a great corporate experience for to have a shot at the MBA, HBS MBA? Now, the question is, do you have people who are 35 years of age from the corporate world who's they're there with you in your class? I mean, just from a data standpoint.
Yeah, we do. So I think the oldest in our class is about 32, 33.
Hmm.
But I think he has a perfect chance of getting into HBS. I don't think age is a factor. I think, yeah, I think he has perfect chance.
Yes. Um, this is, I think, another question I want to take. Shivanshu's question. So when you look at intakes of M7 schools, especially HBS, we see people with these amazing profiles.
Yeah.
What made you optimistic about your application? And first of all, I think let's kind of go back. When you first looked at people who get into Harvard Business School, did you
Yeah.
feel like, man, they are like there and I'm like here, and I was like, I'm never gonna get in?
Absolutely, absolutely. I still feel intimidated in class today. Everyone is so smart. Everyone is amazing. Um, yeah, definitely intimidated the entire process. I really did not think that I was gonna get into any school. I did not have a safety score. If you look at my school list, but it's also the question like, okay, if I got into a school that is not, these top schools, would I go? Right? Would I even go? Is it worth my money? So definitely extremely intimidated. I also told you that I was on the verge of not applying to HBS because I'm like, by December I was burnt out. Why apply to HBS? I would never get in. I think, yeah. Well, how did I manage to be optimistic? I honestly was not optimistic at all. Just try and
No, but you
working.
still have to give your best, right? I mean, it's not
Yeah,
about being optimistic. It's like who you are. Don't try to fake yourself.
yeah. I just tried my best. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. If
Yes.
I am meant to end up there, okay, fine. But I started getting, I had already gotten into Stern when I, before I got my HBS, before I submitted my HBS application. So that was already, a
An
safety,
indication.
indication and a safety net right there.
Mm.
And if all things fail, okay, I go to Stern. That's not bad at all. But was able to I think when I started getting interviews and I was like, oh, I'm not that bad at all.
Yeah, I think one of the things which is very common and very natural to happen. You see, and that happened with me when I was applying. Like you see these guys who, and I talked about VC. I talked about investment bankers who are managing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of investment, and you say, man, I'm not doing any of that. I was an engineer. And was working on a $10 million project, and there's this guy who's managing $2-3 billion worth of investments. But I think you have to take into account that each one of you was unique. Each one of you has had
No, fair.
those leadership experiences, and that are very very valuable. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think you are who you are, and if you believe you made a difference in your organization and the lives of people around you, um, then I think you're a perfect candidate for any top business school. If, on
Mhm.
the other hand, you've not made that difference in the lives of people around you, then I think despite a top GMAT score, you may not get into a good business. So I think one of the things that we kind of recognized last year, we reached out to about 500 of our students who got into various business schools, and it was like actually Karthikeya did the bulk of that research. It was a 2 month long exercise. One of the things that we recognized was that even people who score a 760, but 64% of them get rejected from an M7 school, not just HBS, just M7 period. And but that acceptance rate, 36%, was a lot higher than the acceptance rate of a 720 student that's there. But even a 760, 64% of them get rejected.
Yeah.
Why? Because you can have a top GMAT score, but if you don't have those other pieces of application, you're not going to get into an M7 school.
Yeah, I think just to add on, I think, I was really confident that my background was different from a lot of other people. So I think that kept my hopes alive. I think there was, I think not many people with a food science background apply to MBA. I think, like you said, your individuality, what's unique about you and what story you have to tell, what story you can tell really sets you apart. And I think, just, take some time to introspect and really ask yourself what is different from me. How am I different than everyone else? So,
and what have I achieved? I think that's the difference anyway. So this is an interesting question. Your alma mater, did Cornell matter in your overall? Did it come up in the interviews?
yeah,
And to what extent, if it did?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, the only question they asked me was how I chose food science as a major in Cornell. Other than that, it didn't really come up in the interview process. I think, I don't really think where you went to college matters. We have, wide ranging variety of schools people went for college. I think it's ultimately what impact you had throughout your entire, college plus career. So I don't think really which goal you went to matters.
I think the 3.7 from Cornell that's probably adds a weight because it's a fairly rigorous school. But other than that, yeah, I don't think that matters a whole lot. And I think a question is a bit more personal, which is like, hey, why not NCH? You are from Singapore. I'm sure you got that question from your parents or other people.
Of course. Yeah, I did not want to go back to Singapore. I knew that I was going to be in Singapore the rest of my life. Why spend another year when I could have been abroad in Singapore? So that's my only answer.
Okay. And the other piece is cohort Singapore is probably has now I
Yes.
think they've lifted the restrictions, but they've had the most strict restrictions of any country that I know of.
Yes. So yeah, exactly that too. But also I think INSEAD, along with other European schools, they have like a 10 months or is it 1 year MBA,
Yeah,
which is shorter than the 2-year MBA program in the US. And I think 1 year is too short for me to really grow, explore, etc. So I think that's another reason why I didn't want to apply to those 1-year programs.
that's true. I mean, you do your MBA just once.
Yep.
Yes. Let's talk about this question. I think this is the last question I want to talk about. Questions about your current HBS experience, because we still have about 8 minutes of your time post this. Community involvement and experience. I mean, I think that I want you to kind of think about this in two ways. One is from your own personal background. You've talked a lot about the soup kitchen piece overall. I think if you can elaborate a bit on the impact you made. But then you also have all of these classmates who are out there, and did do most of them have community experiences? I mean, my question is, how did it impact you? And by the way, is it a must, or could you show similar sort of attributes through other experiences?
Yeah, I'm not that sure. I'm not that sure about my classmates background and how involved they were with community. But I think, HBS clearly highlights that community is an important aspect that they're looking for in applicants. So I think, it's important that you have that, but also at the same time, don't just do it. Don't just get involved with community like, a year before you apply. I think it's quite obvious that you're just doing it just for the sake of doing it. I think throughout my life, I think it's always been a huge part of my background. I think, especially with food, I think food is such a common language across community. And so when there is food, there will always be a community. And so that has always been a huge part of my life. And I was able to play to that aspect. Like I said, I'm very passionate about food insecurity and how, we have enough food to eat, but it does not get distributed to where it's needed. So I think I think throughout my life, I looked for experiences where I could really make an impact in that sense, feeding people, making sure that people have enough food. things like that, reducing waste, things like that. So yeah, I was able to highlight that throughout my application as well.
Okay. So it's 7:20. I think I'm going to take 5 more minutes of your time. By the way, I want to thank you for spending time with us, especially before your test. I know I'm very anxious before my exam. So coming to HBS, you have a ton of expectations, and so in what ways? Or you've been there for what 2 months now, more or less,
Yeah.
right? How has the experience been in terms of? I mean, what were some of the things that completely pleasantly surprised you at HBS?
Oh man, it's
Some, not all,
quite
but this is just some.
it's quite a lot. I think the learning curve is very steep. Just because I
And you're
think
someone who's coming from Cornell, who's done an undergrad, which is a fairly rigorous
yeah,
program.
yes, but I think in terms of like business, I think the classes that I'm taking, like accounting, finance, marketing, learning curve is very steep for me on that aspects because I don't have a background in that. And then I think the case method really emphasizes on class participation versus like in the past you come to class to learn. Now it's how HBS does it is that you kind of have to figure it out yourself before class and then come to class and give a comment. So you're before you actually learn something and before you actually hear from the professor what
Mm.
needs to be learned, you have to kind of form a thought or a
Yeah.
perspective
Mm.
before you come to class and be able to give that feedback in class. So I think a different learning style than what I'm used to. So it takes a while to adjust to. But also at the same time, because the learning curve is steep, but also at the same time, you hear from such great, classmates with very
Classmates, yeah.
different backgrounds. So, it's very rewarding at the end of the day. It's very inspiring. You hear different experiences, people have different stories, and I think HBS being a big class also makes it so that there's so much variety of people,
Mhm.
and just talking to them and learning from them is very rewarding.
Okay, I absolutely agree with that. I think I always have made this maintain this. If you want to learn how to implement a flipped classroom, go to a business school because that's what it is. You've got to learn stuff up front, and then you have to come and discuss in class. That's kind of the case study method, and Socrates has had that for centuries, and we're not talking about the flipped classroom in the traditional world right now. And I think that's HBS does it phenomenally well. And for those of you who want to experience the case study method or at least experience a video of how it works, I think there's a phenomenal video on HBS's website where they talk about the case study method. I actually watched it,
Yes,
and I enjoyed it thoroughly after having been through the case study method for a
yes.
couple of years or so. So definitely do that. Uh, how in terms of the quality of professors at Harvard, I mean, what was surprising or pleasantly surprising for you with regards to as you interacted with these guys?
Yeah, I don't know if it's pleasantly surprising because I knew that HBS professors are amazing. But
Mhm.
I think coming here really reinforced that point. I think there are board of directors and they've had like tons of work experiences. And so they're really leaders of the industries, and they're able to really speak to that industry and whatever subject you're talking to, which is really, amazing. You're meeting the top leaders of the world and then they come to teach you. Um, yeah, I think that is,
And I absolutely agree. I mean, I did not go to HBS, but I did a couple of classes there. And one of the things that struck me was that, hey, there's a case that you get, but then these people who are leading that case, they kind of know so much more about the context. They really say, okay, let's go into this boardroom. You have these people sitting there, and this is the scenario. Now tell me, how would you react?
mhm,
And so that those insights are would only come from someone who's been in the industry, who's actually been through those scenarios, and having a professor who does that, or learning from such a professor is just the extent of learning that you get is way more than what you would get from someone who actually is just knows operations or marketing or finance, but has never been through that piece over there.
Yep. Yep.
So Apurva says, can you repeat the name? It's a case study method is the name of the learning methodology, Apurva. It's just if you go to Harvard Business School's website, you can watch a video around how the case study method plays out over there.
Yes.
There's one other question. I think this will be our last question, which is, what do you think is the percentage of people who come from CA, CPA, or business background, or what? I think it's non-engineering folks, basically.
I think HBS recently published data
Yes.
for class of 2023. I can't remember specifics, but I think there was really a large proportion of engineering students. I think maybe 20%, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
20%, and then business also like 20%. I think equal, right? If I'm not mistaken. So I really don't think your background matters. I think again,
Yes.
like what makes you different from everyone else. So yes, you have an
Yes.
engineering background, but what does that mean to you? And I guess what does that mean to you? And what are you using
So,
it for?
so I think the fact that someone's not from a business background is uh, could be an advantage for you, because if you're an
Mhm.
international student, but half the people who apply to these schools are from an engineering background, very few are from a business background. And if you look at this post that I shared, MBA admissions international applicants, this is the research or a part of that research that we did and results of that. And here you would see the 400 people who we interviewed. I think that the number of engineers, the percentage of engineers was about 58% in that.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yes, yes. So I mean, if you're not an engineer as an international applicant, if you're not an engineer, just you have one hurdle covered
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
So so yeah. Well, Lisa, thank you very much for spending your time with us, and thank you for those insights. It was wonderful. For our viewers, if you like this, or if you like our answers, click on the like button. Let us know what you like. Let us know what more you would see, so that we can get more folks from schools such as HBS, Kellogg, Wharton, and so on and so forth, and give you guys good answers. It was truly a pleasure having you, Lisa.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you.
It was wonderful, and good luck for your test.
Thank you.